Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Canbas, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much indeed for giving me the opportunity to talk about democracy and human rights in Rwanda. I want to talk about three things. First, I want to give the context of the recent elections. Then number two, I want to talk about the elections themselves. And then number three, I wish to talk about post-elections. The context of the elections in Rwanda was the constitutional amendment made in 2015. The constitutional amendment did two things. One, it removed, basically it removed a very, very important part of the previous constitution, which said that, I quote, under no circumstances should President of Rwanda serve more than 2 7-year terms. Why was this in the original constitution? It was in the original constitution because historically, since independence, each leader in Rwanda has come through violence and then was removed by violence. And each of those presidents, and the main ones have been three, in their terms, each one managed to win elections by 98%. So this is not a Kagame issue. It's all of them. And of course, as I said, they became power unto themselves. And none of them, we have not had any peaceful transfer of power in Rwanda. So that was the importance of that clause, that under no circumstances. So this is what was removed by the amendment. So now President Kagame can stay in power until 2034. Now, there was something even worse than that. There is something even worse than that in the amendment. In the new constitution, they inserted what we call Article 114, and it's called exemption from prosecution for a former head of state. The article reads, a former president of the republic cannot be prosecuted for treason or serious and deliberate violation of the Constitution when no legal proceedings in respect of that offense were brought against him while in office. But of course, it cannot be brought against him while he's in office because he has immunity. So Kagame has immunized himself even after he leaves power. This article basically gives him license to commit any crimes without any consequences. How do we explain this? Oh, by the way, incidentally, I must say with a bit of sick humor, these constitutions are being made by amendments, are being made by the women majority parliament. These are women majority parliament at work. So the numbers of women is great, but the quality of work they do is rubber stamping the worst possible. Okay, so why is he doing this? We already know that even to come here in the United States, Kagame had to be given immunity. The Obama administration asserted immunity for him because there are already cases against, in this case, about the alleged role in shooting down the previous president. This is the background behind this. But we also know that currently in the International Court of Justice, there is a court from Congo, that accuses Kagame the crime of killing 3.5 million people. Rwanda and Uganda were both taken to this court. Uganda pleaded its case and lost, and is paying reparations. But Rwanda denied jurisdiction over the court. So, but this case won't disappear. It's sitting there in there somewhere. So that is the context. That is the context. Then the elections themselves. I don't have to say much because a lot was covered. 99% out of 96 voter turnout. This begins now to take us closer to the situation of North Korea. But incidentally, this clause that frees Kagame from any prosecution, I have looked at the worst dictators, the worst dictatorship. I have not found any such protection. Now, the elections themselves. I want to quote the British ambassador. The British ambassador was among the observers of the elections. So I quote him. He says that along with other international observers, I personally saw irregularities with the counting of ballots and voter tabulation. And then he concludes, we are concerned by the arrests, and it is concerning to see the targeting of opposition figures. This is the British ambassador in Rwanda. So I really don't have much to say, but now let me talk about post-elections. Post-election is now revenge. It's a period of revenge. It's a revenge big time. And revenge has singled out in particular Diane Shima-Rwigara. Why her? Why her? There are a number of reasons why her. First of all, she is the one who dared to raise issues of democracy, issues of human rights, issues of moral corruption. And by moral corruption, she was saying that even in this economic miracle people talk about, the ruling party itself has accumulated so much wealth. Its conglomerate, Crystal Venture, is now worth 500 million. While the same government punishes and destroys other businesses. Rwigara's own father was killed 2 years ago in a mysterious accident. When the family protested, the government moved on and demolished their hotel. A month ago, another hotel of a competitor to the ruling party, Tower Hotel, demolished in broad daylight. Just 2 days ago, the business of the leading Rwandan businessman, Tribert Rujugiro Ayabatwa, his $20 million Union Trade Center, seized and auctioned for 8 million. So I guess I'm running out of time. I see some signals there. So in conclusion, yeah. So what we have here is very costly experiment. Even those people who talk about the good things, the women in parliament. By the way, those women no one is voted. That parliament is a list compiled by the ruling party. The senators, half of them appointed. Don't confuse the senators in Rwanda with senators in the United States or Congress people. No. These are lists, party lists. Those who are not elected by the president, they're elected by people he has appointed in other institutions. So business success, absolutely not. Yes, if we talk about president traveling in a $60 million plane, rented from his own business at the taxpayer's cost, if that is success, I don't think so. So what should the United States be doing? I think the United States, in my view, has overcompensated. During the Clinton years, during genocide, the government stood by while terrible crimes were committed. Then comes Kagame. So now we have gone overboard. He can't do no wrong. I think that it's time that we take a closer look, support Rwanda. We are not asking by any means to say stop health support or stop education. No. But military, the same military that we are supporting is the same military that is killing its own people. So what is good with the military that is doing great in Darfur when it's mauling down people in Rwanda and Congo? There is a problem there. So I would simply say this. First of all, I conclude by thanking you very much for having this hearing. But also let me thank the Congress, because I believe that in the budget law of 2017, there is a clause in there that says that for any government in the Great Lakes region to receive military support, the State Department must verify if this government, if any government is causing havoc. They're not using those words. Is causing havoc in the neighborhood. So I think you ought to hold your State Department accountable to see if they're doing this. Because we know for sure that causing havoc in Burundi or in Congo has not stopped, which I'm sure my colleague here will say more about. I thank you so much for giving me a few minutes to talk.
Mr. Himbara, thank you so very much for your testimony. I'd like to now recognize Robert Higiro.
Chairman Smith, ranking members of the subcommittee, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I thank you for giving me the opportunity to give a testimony on democracy and human rights in Rwanda. I wish to give evidence. My purpose today is to give evidence to the fact that democracy in Rwanda is impossible because of the environment that exists in the country right now. The commander-in-chief and the Rwandan security forces are part of the problem. Their purpose is not to provide security, but rather to kill Rwandans and cause chaos in the region. Let me begin with President Kagame himself. He's on the record saying after the 2016 State Department report, when they were concerned by disappearances, saying those who talk about disappearances are wasting time. as he puts it, we will shoot them, if possible, broad daylight. That's the president saying, I'm just quoting him, it's not my words, it's his words. We have seen a follow-up of his senior commanders, brigade commanders, division commanders, echoing the same tone, especially in the Western region. In the 2016 State Department's Human Rights Report gives the most recent realities in Rwanda. An increasing number of people have disappeared or have been reported missing since May 2015. That's since our previous hearing. Many of the cases occurred in Ruavu district in Western province. According to Human Rights Watch reports, most of these people were detained by Rwanda Defense Forces. And we believe that they're in military custody. Witnesses saw some of the local authorities participating in this activity. One was the executive secretary in Ruavu district by the name of Mugisha. He was seen taking part in those who were forcibly being kidnapped together with security agents. One Muhammad Munyengango was shot and killed while in custody. At least half a dozen of people have been murdered by the security forces while in prison. Extrajudicial killings recently increased as the security forces cleared the capital of Kigali and major towns of poor people, unemployed, and the homeless. Authorities are rounding up poor people, arbitrarily detaining them in transit centers. They have transit centers across the country. In its 2017 report, Human Rights Watch proved chilling details of extrajudicial killings of 37 Rwandans suspected of petty offenses, such as stealing bananas or a car or a motorcycle in the Western province. That was between July 2016 and 2017. Soldiers have continued to arrest and shoot most of the victims in what appears to be an official sanctioned strategy by the government. The crimes by the state against Rwandans never stops. And this includes dissidents, those inside the country, as they go as far as Europe. That's why I'm here. I tried to run as far as possible, but they still come for you. We'll get a chance to elaborate on that. Rwanda's destabilization of neighboring countries has also not stopped, particularly in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Burundi. In the 2013 DRC, Rwanda disarmed over 770 M23 Congolese rebel combatants. It had previously sponsored to take part or to take over eastern part of the DRC. After the defeat of M23, over 770 crossed into Rwanda, the same number, and were detained in Ngoma. According to the 2016 State Department report, the same number mysteriously vanished. There can be no doubt about their role. They are Rwanda's proxy army used to destabilize the neighbors. In the case of Burundi, Rwanda stand accused of recruiting Burundian refugees into the armed groups who seek to overthrow the government of President Pierre Nkurunziza. In its report, Asylum Betrayed, Recruitment of Burundian Refugees in Rwanda, Refugees International booked Rwanda in the following terms: the Rwandan government must act at once to ensure the civilian and humanitarian character of asylum and protected refugees from recruitment by non-state armed actors. To that end, it must ensure that all efforts to recruit Burundian refugees into armed groups, whether on or emanating from Rwandan territory, and whether committed by Burundian or Rwandan nationals, cease immediately. That was Refugees International. Rwanda must also affirm publicly that the recruitment of refugees into non-state armed groups on its territory is a violation of international and Rwandan law. Mr. Chairman, I know a lot has been said. I can't repeat what has been said, whether it's on the political aspect or the corruption. That's why I want to conclude by thanking you once again for conducting this congressional hearing on Rwanda. We trust that the United States, being the main donor to Rwanda, will make its support conditional to ending terror on its own people and the region. Thank you very much.
Gara, thank you very much for your testimony and for your insights. I'd like to now recognize Mr. Jobins.
Thank you. Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Bass, and guests, it's an honor to join you today, and I thank you for the work to shine a candle to the crises facing Africa and its Great Lakes region. I've been before you before on Burundi and CAR, and greatly appreciate you maintaining the attention there. My name is Mike Jobbins, and for the last 9 years, I've worked with Search for Common Ground throughout Africa and around the world. Search is a conflict transformation organization, and we work to support peace, reconciliation, and inclusive governance here in America and in 44 countries around the world. The testimony that follows is informed by my experience with Search, but the opinions are my own, and I ask that the written testimony be entered into the record. Search was founded on the philosophy that conflict is an inevitable part of human societies, and our aim is to promote the positive aspects of conflict through dialogue, inclusive decision-making, and creative thinking, while preventing the negative aspects, including violence, oppression, and humanitarian suffering. We prioritized the Great Lakes beginning in 1995, opening our first office in Bujumbura, as the region was racked by one of the worst periods of destructive conflict that the recent history has seen, and made a long-term commitment, expanding to Rwanda in 2006, with the aim of supporting inclusive decision-making and reconciliation efforts following the tragic genocide. Over the past decade, Search worked with Rwandan media, government, civil society, and local communities to support reconciliation, address land disputes, build the capacity of civil society and government institutions, with a particular focus on youth and women in rural areas. And in preparing today, I was asked to speak specifically to our work in Rwanda focused on economic and social rights, particularly around land, as well as on supporting the reconciliation and post-conflict governance on the ground that affect ordinary Rwandans in the country. And so my testimony will focus primarily on those topics. To set the scene, Rwanda is the most densely populated country in Africa, has been noted. To bring that home, it's slightly smaller than the state of Maryland, with twice as many people, nearly all of whom are dependent on subsistence agriculture. And the population is growing quickly. When I started first working in Rwanda 10 years ago, there were 9 million Rwandans. Today, there are 12 million. And that's 33% growth in just 10 years. So it's growing quickly, and the underlying math is very clear. Rwandans needed and still need rapid economic diversification and growth, as well as a system to effectively manage land disputes and competition and the stresses that rural populations were feeling as population grows and resources became depleted. And yet, despite the structural challenges in a dense, landlocked, and post-conflict country, Rwanda experienced a dramatic economic transformation. In the last 15 years, according to the World Bank numbers, the economy has quintupled, with the GDP growing from $1.3 billion to $8.3 billion a year. And a lot of that has been driven by a transition away from subsistence economy and commodity exports and towards greater value-add services, cognizant and relevant to the sort of the stresses on rural agriculture. Economic growth has been facilitated, as Congresswoman Bass highlighted, by a regulatory environment that supports business, entrepreneurship, in line with the government's Vision 2020. At the same time, in the context of scarcity, disputes over the allocation, access, and ownership of land remain the most common cause of conflict for ordinary Rwandans. The government has tried to address this issue by adopting policies and putting in place local conflict mediators known as abunzi. And these mediators are put on the front lines of solving serious disputes among stressed rural populations faced with large caseloads, varying degrees of training, and confronted with serious social obstacles, particularly around gender. While women are legally entitled to inherit property, and as noted, there's been a great emphasis on women's political participation, the right isn't always necessarily recognized or respected in practice due to traditional norms and struggles that ordinary rural women have to access justice. And so to support alternative dispute resolution, Search partnered with the Ministry of Justice to support 4,000 Abunzi mediators, including female Abunzi, to support and train community resource people who could serve as advocates for the socioeconomic rights of marginalized groups, and particularly for women, to produce radio programming to ensure that rural residents understand land laws and policies and have the opportunity to ask questions and raise concerns. And finally, to build problem-solving skills so that communities and families can address land conflicts themselves without referring to an overstretched or overstretching the justice system. At the same time, it's clear that given demographic pressure, agriculture in its current form will not sustain Rwanda's growing population. There's been an important focus from the government and from its international partners on developing alternative livelihoods and trying to ensure equal access to opportunities, particularly for rural youth and women to benefit from the economic transformation. But as in all societies undergoing rapid, high technology economic change, the poorest and least educated struggle to take advantage of the new opportunities in the service-oriented, globalized, and educationally intensive economy. Impediments faced by many Rwandans include a lack of information and access to opportunities, a lack of capital and education to seize those opportunities, and a lack of exposure to role models and examples of entrepreneurship to roll those out and take them to scale. And so looking forward, alternative livelihoods is critical, and the kinds of partnerships of the kind we've been developing with the private sector and media to help ensure that Rwandans from the lowest socioeconomic brackets have information access to take advantage of the opportunities available. In terms of reconciliation and post-conflict governance, Rwanda's recovery from the horrific genocide 23 years ago has been held as a modern-day success story, both in reconciliation and good governance. Some of the statistics have been thrown out earlier. I'd also add that Rwanda ranks 44th on Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index, some of the best scores of any African country. And this has been achieved through a governance model that focuses on and prioritizes professional, results-oriented, and technocratic governance with strong central leadership in policymaking and implementation. The strong coordinating role that the central government plays across society has helped stamp out petty corruption and drive a coherent policy vision and agenda. But Vision 2020 also establishes a vision for decentralization and ownership, local ownership, of government policy. Ordinarily, local officials face the difficult task in balancing the emphasis on efficiency and results with the need for the more cumbersome process of creating opportunities for citizen inputs, engagement, and explaining policies to ordinary people. The best Rwandan administrators establish two-way communications with their citizens to tailor and shape policy implementation, but in other circumstances, citizens struggle to find a window to feed into decision-making and in an environment where there's not a robust policy discussion. Socially, Rwanda has made admirable progress in reconciling citizens from different backgrounds who have to live together in their communities despite the atrocities of the past. Hundreds of thousands of people have been punished for crimes committed, and on a day-to-day level, many people are moving on with their lives. At the same time, barely a generation has passed, a short time frame to overcome the horror that's been experienced. And while the country has set aside ethnic identity in fervor of national unity, recovery naturally takes time, and there's an awful lot that remains to be done over the generations to come. Media and civil society are absolutely critical to creating the space for dialogue, both about the past and about the policy issues to lay a bedrock for sustainable peace, participatory government, and effective long-term governance. Since 2006, we've built strong partnerships with local government and independent radio outlets and focused on building alliances based on shared interests. But it's imperative that they're capable organizations to facilitate sensitive dialogues on air and in person in an open environment. And so we strengthen the capacity of media and civil society to work with authorities and work with authorities themselves to engage the population in a constructive and inclusive manner. In view of these few observations, and happy to share more, I want to sort of make four recommendations in conclusion for U.S. policy. First, Sustaining U.S. diplomatic engagement in Rwanda and the region is vital. I think that there's unanimity from everyone in the room on that point. Although there are many competing demands for attention in the Great Lakes region alone, and let alone across Africa, this region can't be forgotten, and it deserves a high-level focus. Within the region, adequate staffing and resources, both within the regional bureaus as well as within the embassies and USAID missions across the region. While it may seem remote to many Americans, the horrors of genocide, civil war, and humanitarian crises that have been unleashed and are still being unleashed in many parts of Central Africa have cost far too many lives, but also cost far too many dollars in international assistance focused on short-term palliation of chronic crises rather than putting the region and its people on a path to a greater recovery. Second, there's some things that the U.S. government and the Congress should learn from the experience of conflict and recovery in Rwanda. Many conflict countries and fragile contexts have been beset by seesawing international attention, focused on immediate short-term recovery, but not sustaining a holistic engagement to economic recovery, political participation, and reconciliation that are needed to sustainably transition from fragility. That's something that needs administrative action, but also congressional action to authorize and to support holistic approaches to conflict and fragility in the Great Lakes region and beyond. We recognize and appreciate the leadership that the Congress has shown on women, peace, and security, and salute the bill that just passed earlier this week. And we also recognize the Eli Wiesel Genocide and Atrocities Prevention Act, which has been introduced back in May and can really make good on the U.S. commitment to never again. Third, regional economic integration is critical given the context of population density across the region, the need for radical economic transformation and a shared economic transformation. It's very clear that regional cooperation, which at the moment is quite beset between Rwanda, Burundi, DRC, and beyond, requires better cooperation across borders, but also people-to-people reconciliation to stabilize the wider region. And finally, it's absolutely critical that the U.S. government continue its support and accompaniment of Rwanda in overcoming the legacy of genocide and in reconciling itself to the horrific events of the past. Even though Rwanda has made much progress in dealing with the aftermath of genocide and the series of massacres that have marked its history, the horrific past and the related trauma still affect other avenues to lasting peace and stability in Rwanda and in the region. Atrocities of this history and their consequences should pave the way to a much more open society where conflicts and differences can be dealt with openly and through dialogue. The U.S. Congress should focus its engagement in working with the Rwandan government and supporting the Rwandan people to build a brighter future and to achieve this goal together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Atquay.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you both for this opportunity to speak before your committee, and also to acknowledge and thank your consistent engagement and leadership on issues related to Africa, human rights, and U.S.-Africa policy, which has been and continues to be essential and greatly appreciated. Amnesty International is a global human rights movement established in 1961 with 7 million members and supporters. We have a presence in 70 countries and have offices in Dakar, Nairobi, Johannesburg, and Abuja. We have been working to improve the respect and protection of human rights in Rwanda since the early 1970s. Amnesty does not take a position on the type of political system a country may have. It is our belief that fundamental human rights must be guaranteed and upheld by all political systems. We do consider the rights associated with elections, such as freedom of expression, association, assembly, among others, to be critical, not only to the election itself, but also to the overall health of open political space. The way governments engage with critics and voices of dissent, how they interact with civil society, and treat human rights defenders are critical indicators that go beyond a single election. With your permission, I'd like to ask that our written testimony be submitted to the record.
Without objection, it's ordered.
The August 4th elections granted incumbent Paul Kagame his third term in office. This followed the referendum in 2015, which changed the constitution, allowing President Kagame to stand again in 2017 and for 2 further terms, should he desire to do so. In 2010, President Kagame won 93% of the vote. In 2017, he won 99%. During the 23 years the Rwandan Patriotic Front has ruled the country, there have been an unwavering and often brutal campaign against government critics and human rights defenders. This campaign has included attacks on political opposition members, included arrest, detention, disappearances, and killings, restrictions on the media and the activities of civil society organizations, and the creation of a climate of fear. These concerns have been echoed by other human rights groups and the United States Department of State, which noted in its 2016 report, government harassment, arrest, and abuse of political opponents, human rights advocates, individuals perceived to be a threat to the government's control and social order, restrictions on the media, and civil liberties. The attacks and the campaign have included, as mentioned above, attacks on the political opposition and, of course, the restrictions on the media and civil society. In 2010, Amnesty reported that the authorities tightly controlled political space in advance of the 2010 elections. Freedom of expression was unduly restricted by broad laws on genocide ideology. Human rights defenders continued to exercise self-censorship to avoid confrontation with the authorities, and conventional courts still fell short of fair trial standards. In 2011, we reported that authorities restricted freedom of expression and association. Media outlets that criticized the government were closed down, editors fled, human rights defenders faced intimidation, investigations into killings were inadequate. In 2012, Amnesty reported that the Rwandan government increasingly prosecuted individuals for criticizing government policies and that there was a rise in unlawful detentions. Violations included restrictions that were imposed on freedom of expression, arrest, unfair convictions of opposition politicians and of journalists. In 2013, Amnesty reported that the government still continued to stifle legitimate freedom of expression, and associations that the illegal detention and the allegations of torture by Rwandan military intelligence were not investigated. This was the same year that the Rwandan government was also found by the UN group of experts to have provided military support to the M23 armed group in the neighboring Democratic Republic of the Congo, which was linked to rape, extrajudicial execution, and the use of child soldiers. The government's crackdown and restrictions on expression, assembly, and association, repression of journalists, human rights defenders, and members of the opposition parties who openly criticized the ruling government, use of unfair trials, and unlawful detentions were raised in our reports of 2014, 2015, and 2016. In 2017, we reported on the severe restrictions that we thought were going to color and shape the run-up to the elections. This was the result of many years of the same types of actions. It is time for the international community to press the Rwandan government to change. Some have argued that Rwanda is still emerging from the 1994 genocide. Others have argued that because Rwanda is doing well economically, the current administration should be given more latitude. These arguments must be rejected as they subvert the common obligation to stand for rights accepted to be universal and that countries have committed themselves to, including Rwanda. Amnesty International has called upon the government of Rwanda to embark upon a longer-term reform process to open up political space before the 2024 elections and, as you mentioned, before the 2018 parliamentary elections, and strengthen basic protections of rights beyond those. The concerns I have outlined impact more than the next election, and addressing them will require more than a temporary easing of some laws, the release of a few people, or even the permission to register a political party or an NGO. The assault on defenders and political space is quickening, and Rwanda is becoming a role model for the wrong things as opposed to the right things. It is not good for Africa, it is not good for the United States, or for the global community, as history is littered with many examples of countries where political intolerance has led to political conflict, and that has been extremely damaging. The global community failed Rwanda once before. It should not do so again. Specifically, we would like to suggest that that Congress and the Trump administration call on President Kagame and the government of Rwanda to prevent and ease restrictions on or the harassment of members of the political opposition, their supporters, on journalists and human rights defenders, and establish an independent judicial investigative mechanism into serious violations of freedom of expression, assembly, and association. We have named a number of specific individuals who have disappeared that should be investigated. Congress and the administration should also urge the Rwandan government to decriminalize defamation offenses in the review of the Rwandan Penal Code. We would also urge the United States to call on the Rwandan government to reform the law on public assemblies and to remove the requirement for prior authorization for public assemblies and instead adopt a regime of prior notification. We would also urge Congress to maintain and increase funding for programs focused on building respect for human rights, the rule of law, and independence of the judiciary. I would like to echo my colleague from Search who raised the issue of building the capacity of civil society and the media. These are critical institutions and have to play their role in establishing, along with the Rwandan government, the good governance, human rights, and the respect for the rule of law. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Akwe, and thank you and all of you for your tremendous input today. I do have a few questions I'd like to ask. One, I am concerned, and I have deep respect for Ambassador Yamamoto, that we seem to be overvaluing State Department, the U.S. government. Some facts like the participation of the Democratic Green Party, which got approximately 1% of the vote. Others who wanted to participate were precluded that opportunity. And then, as he said, the carrying of, the holding to account some of the harassment of opposition candidates that was reported in the Rwandan media. Whether or not that's true, I still don't know. Was it a report, false report, sensational report that, oh, we're holding officials to account? That's not clear. But even in his own testimony, he goes on to say, as I quoted earlier, since the election, Rwandan authorities have targeted several political opposition figures for questioning and arrest. And then he goes on and very accurately quotes from the Country Reports on Human Rights Practices, pointing out arbitrary or unlawful killings by security forces, disregard for the rule of law, restrictions on civil society organizations, government interference with the press, which Mr. Akwe again and others have already made in their testimonies in terms of the crackdown on journalists. It's hard to call that some progress, frankly, when it seems to be going in the precisely opposite direction, where the percentage of the vote gleaned by the president goes even higher than the previous one, and he's in for life based on the constitutional changes. Your thoughts on that, because I think we sometimes turn the page far too quickly, if it should be turned at all, and we're willing to look at one little seemingly bright, shiny object that we can then cling to, and it's a surface appeal argument, that it has surface appeal that the Green Party participated, but what about all the others? You know, it's a talking point that a lobbyist might want to push forward before a less than critical set of eyes and ears. So I'm concerned about that. Your thoughts on that, overvaluing this, what I think is regression, not progress, by the Kagame regime. Secondly, as you pointed out, Mr. Himbara, and I should have asked the ambassador, I will by way of a written question, when you pointed out and brought further attention to Article 114, which seemingly gives, not seemingly, gives immunity, which often means impunity, because if you're not going to be held to account ever for anything you do in office, including rape, having your soldiers rape and kill, and extrajudicial killings and the like, well, you know, you're above the law completely for life. That needs to be, you know, much more further emphasized in our bilateral and hopefully in a multilateral way with Rwandans, if any of you would like to comment on that. And I thought your point, Mr. Akwe, about how and I quoted it earlier, but it bears repeating, you know, when you say, and you have so brilliantly reported on severe restrictions on human rights defenders and the media and the like, and you've done it painstakingly. You also point out to the international community, including Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama administrations have been at best half-hearted in confronting President Kagame and pressing the Rwandan government to reform its policy regarding human rights and political space. You know, those kinds of omissions on the part of bipartisan administrations is unconscionable, because at the end of the day, people get killed, women get raped and abused, people go to prison, journalists get harassed, and the people don't get the truth because the journalists it has a chilling effect on how they write. So if you could speak to that as well, because now we have a new administration, doesn't have all of its people in place yet, but we need to say clearly and unmistakably to the new White House, don't repeat the bipartisan error of the past, because we'll get the same outcome. We'll get more impunity. Whoever would like to go first? Yes.
Mr. Chairman, very often we talk about a smoking gun. I think Article 114 is a smoking gun. Article 14, as you said, it's an impunity. I looked in preparation for this hearing. I looked I read as many constitutions as I could find anywhere, including even the Constitution of the Democratic Republic of North Korea. I could not find a constitution that gives a green light to a head of state, not only to commit crimes while in office, but also after he has left office. So I would assume that he's probably thinking that after he leaves office, he will probably put in a puppet that would refuse to enforce international laws. They then say, look, you can't touch him here, he's here. Because as I said, there are cases here already in the US. And in the US, this is a country where even a sitting president can face law. I'm not going there. So it can face law. So really, if the United States or even United Kingdom, this is a country that Rwanda is a member of the Commonwealth. How does the Commonwealth allow a country that gives a green light to criminality on the part of a head of state and get away with it? So here, I would say that we should begin right there. We campaign for the removal of this because it's either you want to be president and lead and build the economy and do these wonderful things, empower women, that is great. But if you make a mistake, you cannot be above the law. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Normally, I like to go into the details of if what Mr. Jobans just said, if what the State Department just said is true, whether it's development, building institutions in Rwanda, so what's the problem? Why is it that things are not working? I asked him before this started that if Rwanda can really develop so quickly like they're saying, it's a landlocked country, we have neighbors, how do they do it? How do they do it that Burundi can't copy that, or Tanzania or Uganda or DRC? What's the magic? And if there is no issue, why are we here? So I like bringing to this committee exactly what I'm worried about. One, President Kagame criminalizes Rwandans. And we all know when you push people to the wall, what happens? How did we get to 1994? What really happened to get to 1994? It's this. We talk about issues and people choose which side they want to be on. They choose which truth they want to bring out. But we all know that Rwandans, personally, I can talk about genocide because I was there. Sometimes Rwandans will talk about genocide, people have different views. But when it comes to me as a soldier who tried to rescue people during genocide, I fought in the capital city for 3 months before we took over. I know exactly what happened. I know how the Tutsis were being killed. I know other crimes. Then we have what happened from 94 to date. Again, I served until 2010. When I was decommissioned, I was serving the United Nations. I was a peacekeeper. I had 2 tours in Darfur. One as a commander of soldiers, another one as a staff officer, heading the sector's information. I know a lot of that. I know how they work. I know the discipline of the Rwandan soldiers. I know where it comes from. And what I've been striving to give you and the State Department and other elements of the government is the truth. What people have to do with it is not up to me. But Kagame knows all this. He knows we're going to come here and make good speeches, talk about the corruption, and he'll say corruption is everywhere in the world. And most of the people who still go to Rwanda, it doesn't matter where you're working. It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter if you're Rwandan. In most cases, they will never criticize Rwanda. Do you know why? Because that's the end. The previous regional representative of Greater X region, literally Kagame made him fail to do his job. You either say what he's telling you or you don't come back. And it doesn't matter which level they are on. Now, criminalizing Rwandans is in 2 ways. The Hutus, if you follow deeply, most of them are concerned to talk about the current situation. Why? The moment you do that, you become a genocider. They fabricate cases for the Hutus, and some of them have been deported from the United States. I've tried to engage with the United States government about these cases, because the least we need, we're not saying we're supporting those who participated in genocide. No, we are saying we need fair justice. Try them here, right? Because there's no justice in Rwanda. No. That's the problem. So the Hutus have to keep quiet because they're genociders. That's it. No defense at all. Everybody, even those who were born today, Kagame himself said, even their children have to be responsible for their parents' crimes. So up to when a Hutu is going to be free, we don't know, as long as they're still living. Now, the second criminalization of Rwandans is the Tutsis. Today, the opposition political parties in the diaspora, some of them have sympathizers inside the country, have raised the paranoia in the country to the government. So, even these recent arrests, for example, Diane Rwigara, I'm very sure soon you hear that she's part of those political parties. We have a group of 5 political parties who formed a coalition. And it's increasingly becoming stronger, and they are gaining voice. I've spoke this or discussed this with the State Department, because we always say, what's the alternative? Should we just say Kagame is bad and that's it? No. Rwandans have alternatives. They have seen that there's no Hutu government which is going to work. There's no Tutsi government which is going to work. That country was made for them both. The reconciliation he talked about is a fake reconciliation. There is no way you can say that there's reconciliation in Rwanda. By picking a Hutu to become a prime minister every single term, or some of them, he changes them in the middle of the term, does not mean reconciliation. When Kagame has rallies in the western region where it's predominant Hutu, the Hutus showing up, it's a military operation. They start beating them up and driving them to the scene around midnight, when Kagame is going to appear the next day around 3. Yes. That's what happens. So everything we see is a show. What they do, what Rwanda is concerned about, the Rwandan government is concerned with 2 issues. When you get $400 million and you construct a trade center, a conventional center, $400 million. This is what you do. What you're doing is protecting, showing the image of the country, right? Because $400 million can do a lot to the population, be it school, health, water, everything that they are lacking in the interior. So the image of the country, that's what they show everybody who goes to Rwanda. 2, the image of the president. It's only him who can do it, no one else. That's what they fight for. If you don't do it, that's it. It doesn't now, today, it's not about the Hutus and the Tutsis. It's everybody. We have concerns with what's happening to families of these people who have already been killed, like it has been mentioned. You know, we have issues in the military. 4 colonels were recently arrested and taken to unknown locations. It's in my submitted report. Many generals and colonels are out of job. And that's why I say that where we are today in Rwanda is where we were just before '94. Suppose anything happened in Rwanda, suppose Kagame got sick and died, what happens with all this tension? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks for the question, and just to focus on 2 things. I think one is, as we look at political discourse and the political life in Rwanda today, the way that we engage on these questions is fundamentally conflict and the reconciliation. There's no such thing as a success in conflict resolution or reconciliation, neither here in America nor Europe nor anywhere. It's an ongoing process. Every political environment needs continual support to engage and develop a discourse that's healthy to participatory decision-making and to engagement. Rwanda is no different from those. And I think, particularly as we look at the political life of ordinary Rwandans, to view as sort of a dichotomous absolutely success, absolutely failure, misses some of the nuance that characterizes every society where we live and work.
If you don't mind yielding briefly, my thought was that we give undue value, excessive applause to extraordinarily minor steps, while the steps backwards are very profound.
Thanks. No, I absolutely
He expects, it's almost a straw man to think that any of us think there's no perfection. We strive to it, but when things are going in the wrong direction, that was the essence of the question.
No, thanks. I really appreciate that. And I mean, I just what I wanted to sort of just underscore is, as we look at, one of the things that's at least most vexing to us is, as we look at land, which is a life and death issue to ordinary Rwandans, the degree to which citizens understand necessarily the policies that impact them and have an opportunity to input into them, is a continual process, and quite uneven in terms of the way in which local governments, the way in which media and others engage with citizens and lay that groundwork and bedrock for an informed policy debate. And so beyond sort of the policy and the political debates around elections, one of the things that we look for, and particularly in the U.S., focus on democracy and governance and the partnership with Rwanda in the context of dwindling resources, as Congresswoman Bass highlighted, is ensuring that there's adequate attention on building civil society capacity, supporting media to cultivate and to build a context of constructive political discourse, both around development, but also around the decisions that the government takes. That's something that's in line with the vision that's been laid out by the government, but one where we see a need for continued improvement. I think there's almost no place on earth, I might say, where the media environment is has played a more negative role in the genocide. It was certainly a profound thinking for our own organization, how we engage in the role that media plays in societies, and almost no place where the social discourse had been as inflamed and deliberately inflamed And so there's almost no place on earth where more attention needs to be paid to carving out and rebuilding a constructive media space, a constructive civil society and free expression space for citizens to really own and contribute to their own development in partnership with their government, but also in partnership with civil society and with other actors.
Thank you very much for the questions. I think I'll just try and focus on the record of the previous administrations, which I know you in particular and Congresswoman Bass have fought very hard to try to correct. A very good colleague and Africa expert once told me that good friends don't let their friends do bad things to themselves. And I think this is what happened, that there was, as one of the previous panelists mentioned, there was an overcompensation after 1994. There were regional tensions that were genuine and credible, and the Rwandan Patriotic Front had the capacity and the ability to basically be a force for stability. But that was also accompanied by what Representative Bass said were genuine, incredibly impressive numbers in terms of economic, social, and cultural rights progress. No one is disputing that. The challenge, I think, was that it became an either-or. In other words, you are either in support of what were seen as an economic superstar, and any criticism of that was seen as a criticism of everything, which is extremely unfortunate, because what government and what country cannot have flaws as well as successes? Africa is no different. And I think this has also become part, unfortunately, of the mindset of the government, that critiques or questions about certain policies tend to be equated with critiques about the government itself, whether legitimate or not. And that has descended into a reticence from both going back to the Clinton administration and the Bush administrations and the Obama administrations, where there was a reluctance, or whether it was it was almost a struggle to get them to challenge and to actually take the Department of State reports, which consistently documented the shortcomings, and do something about it. And I think your point is right. We may not have the luxury to discuss the past, but we have the present and the future, and the Trump administration has to adopt a different tact, because, as our colleagues have said, the pressure is building. There are trends now where the political space is closing, and Rwanda is usually referred to as the epicenter, and that, I think, is extremely alarming, because, as one of my colleagues just said, wasn't that similar to where we were just before '94, when there was no space and no ability to engage in dialogue? Not simplifying things, but that's not where we want to go back to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to ask, in terms of the government and from the perspective of the U.S., what type of external pressure and which messengers tend to have the most positive impact? And I would ask that of Mr. Jobbins.
Thanks a lot. I think in terms of, in terms of what we see as being constructive, the challenges, there's a risk in overestimating the role that external players and external pressure can play on shifting a political environment, or in assuming that all that's needed is political will, rather than also forging a political way. And so even, I think some of my colleagues have spoken about the concerns about public discourse, self-censorship, like Adite highlighted, but that's also about encouraging public positive models, supporting examples of how citizens have engaged, and creating role models that can craft and foster foster a constructive participation from citizens to their own development, and to the ultimate sort of contribute to political life.
So let me ask you a little bit about that, because I believe your organization is engaged in some of that. And so I wanted to know how you would assess the progress of reconciliation and peace building in Rwanda, and how it might compare with other countries in the region.
Sure, absolutely. I think as many of you know, Rwanda has taken a very different tack to, for example, its colleagues or the neighbor to the south in Burundi. There's been a very strong consensus forged in Rwanda to move beyond an identification of the past with Hutu and Tutsi, craft a national identity that we're all Rwandans. That's something that characterizes Rwandan society today. It's something that from interactions with Rwandans, myself and others, it seems to be something that's broadly accepted. We've worked with with NERC, the National Unity and Reconciliation Council, and it's one that's obviously a different tack from how, for example, we deal with difference here in America. Here we talk explicitly about racial differences. We also talk about our own history in a way that's different, for example, from Brazil, that's experienced similar differences. Every society deals and defines, whether it's class, religion, race, ethnicity, the divisions that make it up are phrased differently and understood differently as a legacy of history, as a legacy of culture, and as a deliberate choice about the vocabulary that people choose to use to describe themselves and to describe their neighbors. The push towards reconciliation and to move beyond that framing is from all that we can see, appears to be in the surveys that we've done, is quite genuine and felt by organizing by ordinary Rwandans. The desire to prevent, the memory of the genocide, the desire to prevent that, again, animates political life. But that doesn't mean that there's not path dependency. That doesn't mean that where you are today is completely divorced from where your family was 25 years ago. And so there is a degree of differences linked to the past that can only be really addressed.
I know that they're gonna call votes in a minute, but I appreciate that. And Mr. Higiro, I think I heard you say that some of the opponents of Kagame have been deported from the U.S. Did you say that?
No, it was not the opponents. The Hutus who have cases linked to genocide crimes. Yes, which have been fabricated.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
They were deported from here
Yes.
recently?
It's about a few months.
Okay.
The last case I know at least is a few months.
And, I don't think there's certainly anybody in this room that feels that there's not a ton of problems that have to be dealt with in Rwanda. And as I stated in the beginning, I think our chairman laid it all out. But I am concerned, though, that if you paint a country as completely negative in this political environment that we're in, where they're calling for, the administration is calling for a 30% cut in the State Department, that, you can have a situation where people just walk away, too. And I don't think that that would be positive, on any account. People have to feel as though there's some hope. Otherwise, what's the point? So those are my only questions. I do have to say, though, that I thought it was rather unfortunate that you seem to be pretty dismissive of the women parliamentarians in Rwanda who I meet with. I mean, they come here as I meet with parliamentarians and women leaders from around the world. And I don't doubt the fact that it might be a rubber stamp, but I don't think that the women view themselves as irrelevant. So, and I do think that women around the world do look at that number and think that it's pretty impressive. I yield back my time.
Thank you. I'll just ask one final thought, or question, I should say. Much has been, many have mentioned, including our ambassador, the plight of Diane Rwigara. And if I have this correct, she has pointed out that she has criticized Kagame and his ruling Rwandan Patriotic Front for acquiring $500 million business empire, Crystal Venture. I introduced the bill just the other day, this week, on Azerbaijan's ongoing and egregious human rights abuses, particularly the political prisoners. And when I introduced the similar bill in the last Congress, and it was roundly criticized by the Baku government, I had met in Azerbaijan a journalist, Kaija, who had exposed Aliyev's corruption. She was a reporter for Radio Free Europe, and we had a hearing when she was incarcerated, and the head of Radio Free Europe came to this room and testified She was eventually freed. I don't know how free she remains. But journalists who take that kind of risk, she had gotten a 7.5-year prison sentence. No mention was made by the White House to protest it, although Radio Free Europe did, thank God. And I often find when you raise an issue that is country-specific, they somehow think you have some ill will towards that country. And certainly Azerbaijan did that. Vietnam does it routinely when I introduce the Vietnam Human Rights Act, which has passed 3 times in the U.S. House, never got past the Senate. When I wrote the Belarus Democracy Act of 2004, which held the Lukashenko's government to account and imposed visa denials and very significant economic sanctions against his businesses. He denounced it, and I was just in Belarus, just a few months ago. And we're getting the same kind of pushback from Rwanda, that somehow we're singling out, and I do it with China. I've done it with many countries around the world where I've had country-specific human rights bills, some of which have become law, like Belarus. And now the most recent one this week was on Azerbaijan. And last time, like I said, it was roundly and derisively criticized by the Baku government. Kagame's got the same view. This has nothing whatsoever to do with anything but compassion and empathy and concern for the people of Rwanda, that they deserve better. So my question is, we've talked about the human rights situation, the attacks on journalists, the attacks on individual people, the attacks that Mr. Higiro and the threats that he faced. My question is, do we know if Paul Kagame has amassed a fortune anywhere? That we often find even Yasser Arafat, who was supposedly fighting tooth and nail on behalf of the Palestinian people. Upon his death, we learned that he had amassed a fortune that would have been well utilized for the people under the PLA at the time, or PLO, I should say, at the time, under their control. And yet he was a rich man, and we find that all over the world. So do you have any information, or could you, if necessary, get back to the committee about Kagame's personal fortune? Does he have one? Yes.
When the Panama Papers came out, I think it was last year, something extraordinary happened. He is the only president in Africa that I know of that featured his assistants. And I say it was extraordinary because elsewhere there was uproar about Panama Papers. But because of the situation in Uganda, no single paper would even dare discuss the Panama Papers. It took nothing. Now,
For the record, what was contained within the Panama Papers?
what was the concern is that they have offshore accounts that operate aircrafts, private aircrafts. So now, we know that in Christoventure is, Kagame and RPF don't deny that Christoventure exists. Christoventure has more employees than even the central government. This is open. Christoventure thrives on cronyism, basically contracts from government. Any opposition, any competition to Christoventure, destroyed. So what is going on there is that even these clean records of corruption, see, what they report about is is petty corruption. But when we talk about institutionalized corruption, then we're talking about something else. The Crystal Venture is in the open. Crystal Venture has 2 aircraft. This is known, 60 million apiece. And what do these 2 aircrafts do? They shuttle the president. So the president basically rents his aircrafts from, so there is Kagame the president renting aircraft from Kagame, the chairman of Crystal Venture. So what's extraordinary is that all this is in the open. Now, the problem is that no media in Rwanda would dare talk about this. But foreign media is doing this. I refer to The Economist. 2 months ago, I think the title is, no, but I'll send it, yeah, I refer to the committee. The case of Crystal Venture, the case of, transfer of public resources from government to Crystal Venture, even these loans he spoke about of 4 million that have built the convention center. Government went into debt for that money, but suddenly the owners of these hotels is who? Crystal Venture.
Mr. Chairman, we have evidence of offshore accounts in Mauritius, which we can always bring to your office.